This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPhone, PDF Pen for iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. And by Take Control Books, the answers you need now from leading experts. Learn more and download yours at takecontrolbooks.com. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I have a rare treat today. I'm talking to not one, not two, but three podcasters, the hosts of Command Control Power, a podcast by ACNs for ACNs. And if you don't know what an ACN is, don't worry, we'll get to it. First, let's get everybody introduced here, and then we can start talking tech. I'm going to just work across my screen just because it's convenient for me. So first up, Jerry Zigmont. Jerry, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here for the very first time.
Oh, thanks for having us, Chuck. We're big fans of the show, MacVoices, and we learn a lot. And some of our friends have guested with you on a recurring basis, like Mark Fuccio. So we enjoy hearing a lot of what you offer.
Mark Fuccio canceled the show. I'm not sure that's the best recommendation. So, Jerry, tell me about your operation and what you do as an ACN.
Sure. So I've been an Apple certified consultant for almost 8 years, and that really puts me in contact with most of my target audience, which is a small to medium-sized business. And we help people either learn how to use their Macs better, or we deal with people who are moving away from PC and moving towards Mac, or just a mixed arena where there are some Macs and there are some PCs and they need them to communicate better.
Great. Well, it's good to have you here. Thanks for being here.
It's good to be here. Yeah.
Next up, Sam Valencia. Sam, thank you for coming. It's great to have you too, also for the first time.
Thank you, Chuck. My company is HCS Technology Group. I actually manage the Connecticut branch. I'm based out of Norwalk, as you'll find similar to Joe. And I've been an ACN for quite a while, about 14 years, and I'm also an Apple certified trainer. So I've been doing quite a bit of traveling, working on those gigs, training much more or less along the East Coast. And our target audience is similar small, medium businesses, although we deal a good deal with enterprise as well.
Very nice, very nice. Norwalk, Connecticut. How far is that from Hartford?
Probably a little under an hour on a good day.
Not bad.
you got 95 and 84 involved there. Those are two, major highways that also often deal with a lot of traffic.
I've been on both before. In fact, at high speed and at standstill. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, sure feels like it. Well, the third member of the triumvirate is Joe Saponare. Joe, it's great to have you, and thank you for being here for the first time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chuck. It's great to be here. And like Sam, I'm also based in Norwalk. Excuse me. My company, SciMac, has been in business for 10 years, and we do a little bit of everything as well. Small businesses, home users, and we do basically anything related to Apple technology.
Very nice. Very nice. So, guys, I got to tell you, I always kind of find it amusing at times when the podcasters start interviewing the podcasters. It just never sort of makes sense. But this one is an exception because you are all ACNs, which means Apple Consultants Network. So you all have the official Apple designations for training, for tech work, for a little bit of everything. That to me lends a lot of credibility. You guys are not just hobbyists doing this, on the side. This is what you do for a living. And the fact that you decided to take your expertise and share it primarily for other ACNs out in a podcast is a really intriguing idea. Who came up with this?
I have to take a little bit of credit for that.
There you go, Joe.
For a long time, I was thinking about how great it would be to hear people like me, talking about business, talking shop, growing their practice, just basically, talking about technical issues they've been dealing with, client issues, things like that. And of course, I've known Sam for a long time, and I thought Sam would be a great candidate to be a co-host on there as well. And one day, out of the blue, Jerry actually called me, and we got to talking. And I said, "This guy's got a good voice, and here's the third member." So we kind of pulled it together after that conversation, and it's been going for a little over a year since then.
So let's talk about how often you publish, how you publish, that kind of thing. And I don't mean the recording details. We're not going to get that down that far. But is this a weekly, bi-weekly kind of thing, or is it whenever you find something worth talking about?
Every week, pretty consistently. We record a show every Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, with some rare exceptions due to travel mostly, when we'll usually, in that case, record a show in advance and then post it on a Tuesday. So we've been very consistent about doing something every week for the show.
Jerry, does each show have a particular theme or topic, or is it just sort of whatever has hit your desks, your respective desks that week?
Well, sometimes it's what has happened in the Apple world at large. So sometimes if Apple has some sort of a special event, then we can certainly respond to that. But most of the time, we have frequently what we refer to as war stories, things that we've sort of happened to us over the last several weeks. And we make notes as we go along during the week. And those are the types of stories that we share. And usually something that we'll bring to the show is something that we feel would either benefit our colleagues in some way or benefit the general listenership. Because one of our goals is to not necessarily have this narrow casted towards Apple consultants as a whole, but really anybody who's really tech-minded and really wants to get a little bit deeper into Apple tech would really find the show interesting.
And, just to add to that, I think those war stories are the best part of the show a lot of times. I mean, that's where we get the most amount of positive feedback. And also we do a live chat when we record on Tuesdays. And that's when the room really lights up and people will say, "Oh, that happened to me," or "I have some advice for you," or "Thanks for the tip." And that's the beauty of it. We're lending our voices to the ACN community, but they're also lending their voices to us. And we oftentimes learn a lot from them as well.
So when you talk about war stories, guys, are we talking about the tech side of the war stories, or are we talking about the human customer service side of the war stories? Because the tech stuff would be interesting. I imagine you guys have some great stories to tell on the human side.
It's a little bit of both. Yeah. Sometimes we try not to be too specific. We try to generalize with a client story because there's always that possibility that the client may stumble across our podcast and find us and say, "Hey, that's me." But, it all depends. It's about 50-50.
And the tech part, I want to get into that because I'm not quite sure how to approach this. Are we talking troubleshooting kind of things, or we had this problem and this is how we solved it, or this was an unusual problem and this is how we solved it? Where do those stories come from?
Spend a lot of time on Mac OS X server and all the trouble it gives us. But it's a lot of stuff like that. We deal with an issue randomly at a client and we think, this is one for the show. This is an interesting thing for the others to give us feedback about, and maybe some colleagues in the chat, like Sam mentioned. It's that kind of thing where we're just basically talking shop, both tech and client related, as Jerry said.
We've actually acquired guests on the show because of topics that we've talked about, tech-related topics, where someone says, I feel like I have something to offer in this area, and we bring them on the show, and they lend their voices to the rest of the community, and it's great because we found someone that's knowledgeable, and everyone picks up a lot from that.
Now, are we talking about other ACNs, or are you talking about other tech experts along the way?
I think some of them have been ACNs, others perhaps not, but all of them are knowledgeable in their area of expertise. So it's not a requirement to be an ACN to listen or be a guest on our show.
One of the products that we deal with a lot is ACNs are either direct attached storage devices or network attached storage devices. So we've had people from Drobo on the show, people from Synology, Promise. So a lot of the manufacturers that we feel could really speak to our community, we try to go after and sometimes bring them on the show and interview them.
That's exactly where I was going, Jerry, is just trying to get a feel for, who, if I tune in, who I might listen to or who I might get to hear from. in relation to those things. I personally, if you know anything about MacVoices, I like to do that. I like to have the company reps on. I think it's great when you have the pundits and they have a lot to offer, but there's still nothing quite like hearing from the people who making the hardware, making the software. They're really the guys where the rubber meets the road, and I think they can tell their story best.
Right, and it brings a real human quality to the product as well.
Great point. Great point. That's something that does get missed a lot. We all think that that every software developer, every hardware developer is a big faceless company. And sometimes it's just one or two guys who have, worked out a deal with a manufacturer to take their idea and make it reality, or that, they write the code themselves and they answer the emails themselves.
That's right.
So what are some good stories? I got to ask that, from the human side. We'll start there, that you can repeat that would, take the names out to protect the innocent.
Well, we've had some good ones over the past few months. I think some of them, being a little bit general about the discussion, is more about how we've come in and saved the day for the customer. A lot of times it's something where we either had the quick answer to the problem that seemed like a very big one to them, or we just did our due diligence research, or even reached out. That's the funny thing about this, is each of us have reached out to the other for advice or tips. And that's kind of a small subset of what we overall do with the ACN community. So I think some of the really classic ones have been the ones where we've literally had customers in tears and needing our assistance. And when you can really come through with that and show them the light at the end of the tunnel or bring back their data, it's an amazing feeling on a personal level.
I can understand that, because I've seen that at times at a user group where sometimes those solutions are pretty easy fixes, but for someone that doesn't know how, that's just as important as taking the Mac apart and putting it back together.
Yeah, and you talk about the human element a lot, and so did Jerry there, and that's the big piece of it. Yeah, we're tech guys, and we hopefully know what we're doing in that respect, but the piece of it is guiding the customer through it or the client through it and making them feel okay and not making them feel insecure or not smart in what they don't know, because this is our field, not theirs. So fixing it is fine, but helping them feel okay about the whole process is the bigger part.
I think a recurring theme in our show is that, and it's really a sort of a sweeping theme across technology in general these days, is that the simpler and the easier companies like Apple are trying to make the user experience, sometimes the more complicated workflows can become for clients. And we're dealing with, on a daily basis, clients who are completely up to their gills in not being able to manage or handle their iPhoto libraries or their Aperture libraries, just that their media is growing exponentially. And we're challenged by that on an ongoing basis, because Apple does make some solutions which solve that problem, and some of them don't. But we're speaking of media management. I can think of a story that Joe shared with us several episodes back, where a client had an iPhoto library in an unusual place. Joe, do you want to share that one?
Yeah, that was a ways back. I've seen it a couple times now. It's a little scary. In the case I think you're referring to, Jerry, the client had stored their iPhoto library in the trash somehow. Who knows how that happened. And, perfectly good place for an iPhoto library, I guess. And it used to be that iPhoto, I think back in iPhoto 6 era, wouldn't really complain. It would just sit there and read the iPhoto library in the trash and keep on chugging along, no problem. And I think it was it wasn't a PowerBook. It was like an original, I guess, pre-unibody MacBook Pro, and it just stopped booting. Luckily, the hard drive hadn't failed, but basically the easiest solution we came up with was to restore from a Time Machine backup. And so we restored her data, got the client back up and running. Everything looked good visually, full migration, no problems at all, until she went to open iPhoto a few days later, and it wasn't there. It was prompting her to just, select a library or start over. And I looked in the iPhoto preferences to see where did it think the iPhoto library was supposed to be. And sure enough, I found the path to the iPhoto library in the trash. And at that point, I realized that Time Machine doesn't actually back up the trash. So, you might think it's a full backup, and it was kind of news to me at that point that it hadn't backed up the trash, but you can understand why you might exclude the trash as well. So that was a decision Apple made, and not a lot of people sort of think about that. And that would have bitten this client pretty bad if we hadn't held the old hard drive for a time, waiting just to see how this all played out. And luckily the drive was still accessible, and we were able to, pull the iPhoto library out of the trash on the old hard drive. And luckily the hard drive hadn't died, and that would have been a big shock. So we got lucky there, but that was one of those where, thanks to the client just kind of remaining calm and saying, I know you guys can probably fix this, we were able to figure it out.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPhone, PDF Pen for iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. Text Expander by Smile is a great way to step up your productivity game by simplifying those repetitive tasks we all have. This week, by pointing you to some sources for snippets that power users have created and shared, I want to give you some ideas of how you can harness the power of Text Expander. Yes, it will rock your world. Take a look at a Macworld article by Dan Miller entitled My Top 5 Text Expander Snippets. Dan shares 5 different and varied snippets that include email signatures and boilerplate messages, an HTML code and clipboard tip that I have personally found very useful, a snippet for Google, and a text manipulation snippet. Or, if you want to explore the geekier side of the power of Text Expander, check out Brett Terpstra's site for some snippets that will aid you in AppleScript, Markdown, CSS, and more. And those are just a very, very few examples of what you get when you tap into the power of Text Expander. There's more, lots more, like fill-in-the-blank snippets to help you enter variable data in multiple fields, data and time snippets, insert photos and graphic snippets, and much more. Find out what Text Expander can do for you by downloading a free trial at smilesoftware.com, and when you realize just how useful it is, buy your copy on the Smile website or in the Mac App Store. The power of Text Expander, brought to you by Smile, the makers of world-class software. Thanks to Smile for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices.
And I think we've all shared this as well, is that we've had situations where some of our clients use Microsoft Office 2011, and if that the data folder, the user data folder, gets moved, the mail client will launch, and it'll show a completely empty mail library. And we bring up some very valid questions, like why doesn't the user get a warning if in fact they're taking their user data and moving it to some other place on the hard drive where the program won't function? So we've often put out fires like that where a client thought that all their mail was gone, and it was just simply a matter of identifying where the user data folder was moved to and just putting it back in the right place, and then launching the email client, and the mail comes back.
The comment about things becoming more complex as Apple tries to make them simpler is intriguing to me, and I think it's so true. It's tough to fly a jet without all the controls and all the information that you get back, but at the same time, Apple wants to not dumb it down, but streamline it, I guess. And I think that that's great, except that people start taking on bigger projects and they take on more things, and then they find themselves sometimes in over their head, either within the software they're working with or just within the OS itself, because it makes it easy for you to get there. And if you've done enough learning along the way, it's fine, and that's the way it should be. But otherwise, trying to call someone like any of you three is an absolute essential thing, rather than going and having to dig through Google and try to find the answers.
It brings to mind an old Apple knowledge base article I remember that was referring to the sync services folder. Do you guys remember this? It was an Apple knowledge base article right on their support site that said something about what the sync services folder was, and it said just avoid it as if it were a swarm of bees. That was a phrase that Apple actually used on their website because, you get a lot of people thinking, well, I can just poke around, see, oh, maybe this is the problem. Let's move this folder aside or let's try and fix it. But as things have gotten more complex, Apple has removed a lot of those potential solutions, and you have to really know what's safe to try and what's not safe to try. And that's where I think it's important to hire the expert, of course.
On making the library folder basically invisible to the casual looker. If you know what key combinations to hit and you know how to get to it, you can now get to it a lot easier. But for a while there, you really had to know what you were doing to get in there. I'm not sure that's a bad thing because you poke around in there and you can really mess things up. But it's I guess trying to strike that balance, and I'm sure it drives work from you, or maybe sometimes takes work away from you, depending on the decisions that are made.
That's right.
A lot of times my attitude is good luck. I mean, hey, it's great if a client can fix something on their own. That's fantastic, but they could easily get themselves into a lot more trouble than they were already in, and that can lead to a lot more billable time that we have to spend to get them out of trouble. So, I always try to advise a client. It's not rocket science. This is not something that's inaccessible to you as a user necessarily, but it's something that we have experience doing. You probably don't, and you kind of just try to empower them as a little bit, and try not to ensure your own job security by, waving the hands and saying, this is like too much for you to do. But at the same time, you want to sort of warn them that they may not want to poke around too much if they don't know what they're doing.
How much call do you guys get? I mean, we're talking a lot about Macs because that's obviously the longest in the tooth, the most sophisticated system here. But how much call do you get for people with iPhone or iPad problems?
These days, we've been seeing more and more of that, especially in education and places where people think they can replace the laptop with them and go on the road with it. And in some cases, that might be applicable. But as people have more and more devices, a single person would have a MacBook Pro, an iPad, an iPhone. We get more and more of those calls because of the fact that they need to make them all work together. And yes, Apple does keep it a little bit more less complex, but still at the same time, you want to be careful about what they're able to do and show them the ropes, so to speak. So we do get a lot of iOS calls. I don't know about you guys as well.
Yeah, part of our training in depth that we need to bring to the table when we go to see a client is an extremely deep working knowledge of not only the Mac device, but obviously the iOS devices, because of this symmetry that Apple wants to bring across all the devices and have all the devices talking to one another. So several years ago, the expectations for someone was, maybe they would get their contacts to sync, and now it's considered the standard or the norm. So the expectation for these devices to all work seamlessly and perform is there from the client. So we have to make sure that all sort of works. And a lot of times it doesn't. I mean, one of the things that we discuss almost on an ongoing basis is how clients get extremely confused between the difference between their iCloud ID and their iTunes ID, and how those can be uniquely different and still work together. And that just confuses the heck out of people.
Especially in families. All of a sudden you have a mom saying, my kid's seeing all of my messages come through on their device. Why is that happening? And you have to calm them down and walk them through the process.
So this is really interesting. So here's one of the stories that we potentially will discuss on our show tomorrow. But I met with a client last week, and that exact scenario happened, Sam, where he went to the Apple store and he got an iPad and he signed in with her iCloud ID and started to delete all her contacts. But no problem, because we had her backing up with Time Machine on her Mac. But the only caveat there was that on her Mac, she never launched the Contacts app. So since the point that we put Time Capsule in place, she theoretically had never launched the Contacts app on her Mac, so her contacts weren't backed up since the day of installation.
Oh boy!
So so he deleted all her contacts, and we couldn't get them back.
That sounds like no fun at all.
Why would you log into Contacts in any circumstance and start to just ham-handedly deleting contacts?
There are lots of questions like that we might want to ask our clients.
Yeah. If you're 13 years old, I guess it seems like a good idea.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was her son who did this.
All right. Now I got it. Okay. I was afraid it was like,
And if she's listening, she knows who she is.
I'm thinking, angry husband or something, which, I mean, that seems pretty punitive. So, okay, 13-year-old, yeah, I get it.
I've noticed kids are just a lot more sort of like irreverent with data. They just they wouldn't even think twice about it. I mean, an adult might think, I better call somebody. I better find out. Is this syncing? I don't know. How'd this get here in the first place? Maybe I shouldn't just start deleting things. Kids are like, I don't know. I don't care. They just, a lot of times they get a new computer. They just want to start over. It's just really surprising. Kids have just a different sort of perception of data.
And I've been in a situation where I'm actually trying to help the parent, and the kid's like, no, Mom, Dad, I can do this. Don't worry about it. I'm like, we have to have a back and forth. I'm like, okay, kid, I understand, but I'm handling it right now.
and Joe shared the experience where very often our clients will go to the Apple store and they'll come back with a whole brand new Apple ID, right?
Right. Yeah, for a while I was seeing that where, they just, Apple, the geniuses are just like, oh, you don't know what it is? You don't know the password? No problem. We'll go ahead and set up a new one. No big deal. So now they've got a different ID for apps that are on this phone versus the, Apple ID that's used to buy music on their Mac versus the Apple ID for apps on their iPad. And sorting that all out is just a nightmare. And, like you said, you brought it up, Jerry, people don't know the difference between, the Apple IDs and for what use. And early on, that bit a lot of people when Apple started to prompt you to sign into iCloud, with the setup of a new iPhone, for example, and now with the Mac. And there's a small little skip button there that most people don't see. But I got the impression early on that maybe this is maybe it's a little cynical of me, but maybe Apple, this is just a way that they want to get everybody sort of hooked on iCloud, because the solutions we all came up with was, well, even if they don't have an iCloud ID yet, they know what the parents' Apple ID is for the purpose of iTunes. So we should probably set them up with their own iCloud ID to prevent them from logging into your Apple ID as their iCloud account, leading to this thing that Sam mentioned where everybody has the same text messages and everything's all mixed together. So the solution was, well, just make a new iCloud account for everybody. And so Apple kind of wins either way. They just... everybody's on iCloud and everybody's stuck in the Apple ecosystem.
I know Adam Angst has talked a lot about that Apple has been wonderful at saying, this is my machine and it can do everything and it's an extension of me. But when it comes to the collaboration things and when it comes to families or those kind of groups, that they're still finding their way and trying to learn and figure it out. We hear this a lot from families that have had kids that have been in their teenage years. Now they're ready to go off to college. Well, what do you do with all the apps? What do you do with all the music maybe that have been bought under the family ID, but now the kids need or want or should have their own? How do you move some of those things over, or do you just rebuy everything?
Yeah, and basically that's the answer. And I think, again, Apple wins because, it's not you can't really move purchases between accounts. You can't easily split. The other one that comes up sometimes is in a divorce. If the husband and wife are sharing an Apple ID and they have a whole library of music, how do you split that up between the two? Maybe they both have the same music, and then one of them just starts buying music with a new account. But there's no way to sort of easily split that between the two.
Yeah. Now, this admittedly will probably change with some of the implementation of some of the changes that Yosemite is bringing. Right. At least this is what the promise is. And the other thing, too, is in terms of addressing these groups of people that are all together, whether it's a small family or a small office, the same problems exist, where the small office now is challenged by, well, how do we manage this app that we'd like everybody to use in the office? What is the ID that we use? And so we're faced with sort of taking a consumer-based solution and putting it in sort of rejiggering it to have it work for a small business. So these are some of the challenges that we face as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, going on exactly what you're talking about, I've walked into plenty of new clients and they said, well, we have about 8 employees and we all just use the same Apple ID and everyone downloaded this app for their devices. I'm like, well, that's not exactly cool. And, we have to explain to them that that's breaking license agreements and we need their individual users. So we go with volume purchasing in certain cases. But at the same time, a lot of companies are just not aware. They don't know that they're doing something wrong. And again, that's where our knowledge base might be helpful, where we come in and kind of alert them and help them and guide them through the process.
And again, it's not like Sam is trying to be the Apple police, but down the road a piece, this will actually end up creating more problems for the company than it's worth.
Well, and there's the little matter of licensing, which I do think sometimes gets short shrift, especially in small businesses. And there's a right way and a wrong way. And, we've all heard about the software audits and, how realistic is it that they're going to get done? But if they do, well, then you can have a real problem. It's just a lot easier, better, simpler to play by the rules, especially, play by the rules, period. It's not, we're not talking about that much money. And at the end of the day, and especially now with the price of apps, why don't you play by the rules, get the support, get everything, the upgrades and all? It's just a lot easier.
Absolutely.
I was glad though to hear you kind of go in the business direction and talking about that, because as I recall, education had that problem early on,
Definitely.
where classes or schools were trying to buy iPads and then trying to get apps, and it was a nightmare. Do you all get called into education situations much?
Well, Sam, not to interrupt Sam, excuse me, but Sam is a trainer for mobility. And so a lot of times he'll train the ACNs, or many times he'll train the ACNs to use some of these Apple tools to address schools and institutions. So, Sam, if you wanted to.
Thanks for tooting the horn for me, Jerry.
Of course.
I've been dealing a lot recently with education. Just it's summertime. It happens a lot. We get a lot of educational calls where there's the downtime, the students aren't there, so we're called in. And certainly that's a big thing when you have a district that has, let's say, 500 iPads they're trying to distribute, and they say, I don't know what to do. How do I get these apps on these devices? How do I distribute them properly? And that's, as I mentioned before, where we involve the volume purchasing program and show them how to make these purchases and appropriately distribute them to the devices using some sort of MDM or mobile device management solution. And it's been, you asked the question about iOS devices a little bit earlier, Chuck, and that's summertime is a big part of that aspect of it.
This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Take Control Books, the answers you need now from leading experts. Our friends at Take Control Books have been busy over the past few months, delivering lots of new titles, each one of them a study in effective analysis and training on whatever topic they focus on. I look at Take Control Books as a way to hire some of the best experts in the business to teach me what I need to know about programs like 1Password, iTunes, and LaunchBar, and topics like digital photos, online privacy, and going paperless. The training is concise, effective, and affordable, focusing on things I really need to know. It seems like program documentation has gone from the 300-page manual down to the barest essentials. Take Control Books bridge the gap, covering the features and topics that are important, and get you up and running quickly and efficiently. Even better, Take Control authors often engage online with their audiences. And don't forget that Take Control Books often offer an upgrade when updates or newer versions of the programs are released. All that is why I introduce you to every Take Control author about every book released, if at all possible. Authors like Joe Kissel, Michael E. Cohen, Tanya Angst, Sharon Zardetto, Kirk McElhern, Jeff Carlson, and many more. They are all that important to your understanding of your tools and to your productivity in a competitive world. Visit Take Control Books now at takecontrolbooks.com. Find something you want to learn more about, and see if you don't agree that Take Control Books are among the best values in tech education. Take Control Books, the answers you need now from leading experts. Thanks to Take Control for their support of MacVoices. Before we wrap up, I definitely want to touch on the business aspect of being an ACN. Being an ACN, as I understand it, and I'm not an ACN, but you're so obviously
join us, Chuck.
Yeah, in my spare time, definitely. The idea is you're independent business people, you're independent consultants, and that brings with it a whole host of not issues but challenges and things that need to be addressed. How much of the podcast is directed toward that?
I think a good deal. We do cover, sort of running the business, best practices. We each bring our own perspective as we kind of started off the top of the show. I, like Jerry, was a sort of one-man show for a number of years, and recently made the transition to, basically 3-person team right now, with some additional even support, in bookkeeping and things like that. So that's a great topic that I've always really enjoyed talking about and hearing about. So we do cover some business topics like that, how to make that transition. We cover things like rates, how to bill for different services. We've been focusing pretty heavily on something called managed services, which is just basically a way of rendering services and charging for them recently. So we do get into business topics in addition to like the technical stuff. So, anybody interested in even just running a small consultancy or any kind of sole proprietorship practice of any sort, I think would find some of those topics interesting as well.
I think that's where I've actually personally learned the most out of our own podcast. I mean, that's self-serving in a way, but we've learned so much from some of the guys in our community from that I've actually altered some of my practices, and I've figured out different ways of doing things because of people that were listening to us and offered their own advice. And I had a light bulb moment a couple of times, and I said, that's brilliant. So I think to me, those are my favorite topics. I love the tech aspect of it. I love learning how to do something better or offering some advice, but the business aspect is where I've learned the most.
I think when Joe first expressed his intention to do this podcast, it really resonated with me because I felt like in my own little area here in Connecticut, and again, Connecticut's a small state, but we're all able to run our own successful businesses, and there's also other ACNs in the state as well who are managed to remain successful. There's a lot of opportunity, but a lot of times, these are very sort of tight organizations, and you don't have a chance to compare notes with your colleagues. So this was a welcome voice in the wilderness, because up to this point, there were lots of tech podcasts, but there was nothing that really spoke to what we did. So that was something that I really feel fortunate to be a part of.
What kind of response have you gotten from the audience? And when I say the audience, I guess I'll split it in two. The ACN audience, who obviously bleeds the same colors you do, but also the non-ACN audience who is listening in and absorbing both the business ideas as well as the technical part.
Well, one guy said we sound like a bunch of high school guys talking, just saying things are cool. Other than that, that was one guy on Twitter. I think that was the only negative feedback we've ever gotten. We've gotten a lot of great positive feedback from other members of the community who are really thrilled we're doing this, and it really gives us sort of more energy to continue doing it. And like these other guys have brought up, there's a lot of people we've met through doing this that we've had on the show, even because they have a great perspective that we can bring and promote to the community. So it's been very rewarding and great feedback. And
in the information that we share, it's basically no holds barred. So the kimono is open, and there's nothing that we don't share with our listeners in terms of either dealing with clients, dealing with Macs, or dealing with the business end. One of the interesting things is we as Apple consultants, and sometimes this speaks to how flexible and how sort of quick we need to think on our feet, is there's no secret knowledge base that we are able to tap into as Apple consultants. Most of what we learn is on the job, sort of in the trench. You're knee deep in a server installation, and that's when you really gain a lot of your intellectual property, and you take notes furiously or you record them on your computer, and those sorts of things where the server comes back to bite us, sometimes we're happy to share that. So it's a nice resource for sharing knowledge.
Interesting point that you don't have a secret knowledge base or something to tap into, that we basically have the same access to things you do. So what I feel like we're really buying with an ACN is the experience, are the battle scars. And
absolutely,
those scars can be hard won.
As an example, we haven't done one migration or two migrations from Mountain Lion to Mavericks. We've done dozens and dozens of them. So every possible scenario that could come up with just about every possible machine, we've seen it before, and we sort of know how to get out of those tight situations. Whereas At that point, maybe a client might be in an impasse, and then they end up going, their only resource really is to go to the Apple Genius Bar. And sometimes that proves successful, and sometimes you just can't. Sometimes it's not that practical for you to lug your big 27-inch iMac down to the Genius Bar because it's failed in installation. And that's, I think, real fine opportunities for us to prove our worth.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jerry. That's oftentimes the way I describe it to a client when they want to know if is this something I can do myself? Can't you just give me like the step 1, 2, 3 of it? And in many cases, a client certainly could download and install Mavericks. It's not a big deal. But in those other cases, that's where we need to draw on our experience to be able to, make it a smooth installation no matter what kind of difficulties we encounter. So that is a great way to sort of demonstrate our worth, I guess, as consultants.
We've talked about it on the show. We get those calls after the fact of an install.
That's right.
I installed Mavericks. Now this doesn't work. Well, there's a reason for that. And that's why we're here.
And I would think that the need for this kind of consultancy has grown as more non-technical people have adopted the Apple ecosystem. There was a time that any of us could have handled a lot of the problems, but that's because we were all tech people. Now you have people that are absolutely as farthest you can possibly imagine away from tech people, and they're trying to use Macs and iPhones and iPads in their businesses or in their personal lives, and they desperately need help, and they don't want to go through the Apple support site, and they don't want to dig through all this. They need somebody to come and fix it, or take it to somebody and fix it, and let them get on with their lives.
Yeah, that's true, and that can be a real challenge too. Is the Apple's marketing often, sort of positions it as something that should just work, and clients will actually say that to us, like, I thought this was supposed to just work. I thought Apple was supposed to be simpler. So it's tough because a lot of people buying into it are people that are buying into it because they want something that's really simple that they can, they don't have to worry about. And in many cases, that's the case. They don't have to worry about it. But where we come in is when, they don't want to even go to the first page of Google results because it's just not their forte.
And at the end of the day, at least from my experience, and obviously I'm a little biased, the Mac ecosystem, the Apple ecosystems have a tendency to work as advertised a lot more often than some of the other options out there. That's not me being a zealot. It's just my experience that it's far and away a much more stable, usable platform that has a lot better uptime and a lot fewer failures.
Yeah.
So generally, that's true. And just to put in a plug for the Apple consultants community at large, is that we're kind of a well-hidden resource on Apple. Sometimes when you go to a business presentation at an Apple store, we're a single slide in their keynote presentation. But we do have a point of presence through the Apple website. So if you go to consultants.apple.com, you can find your local consultant by just simply doing a zip code search. And they're out there, and we really welcome, listeners and people to, when they need to, when they're in it, not only when they're in a jam, but if they feel like they need to sort of outsource their IT work, we're a wonderful resource for that. Let us be, this is a cliched phrase, but, we are often, their IT department.
Jerry, let me put you on the spot a little bit. How does one decide whether the consultant that he or she has connected with is right for them? Is it strictly a matter of technical ability? Do you think there's personality involved in there? Is it the kind of problem that they have for the right kind of ACN?
I think that's a great question. I think that a lot of times it has to be a mutual match in terms of us dealing with the client and the client dealing with us. So I think that there has to be some harmony that exists. But obviously, if you're not getting results from the client you hired, that's very, very clear. So if that person seems to be fumbling around and Googling a lot, but I think with the safeguards that Apple's put in place in terms of the levels of certification that you need to carry the Apple logo, and not only are we desktop certified, but we're also server certified. I think looking for someone who's had a number of years in business, through this Apple Consultants Locator, you can read reviews from independent people who've hired them or businesses. So you can sort of vet your consultant that way through the Apple Consultants Locator, and look at their depth of training as well. Those are featured in the locator.
Yeah, to go a little bit farther on what Jerry was saying, there's a point of focus of that particular business, small, medium, enterprise, training, and just a little bit about them as a whole. It leads right to their website. So you can really get a lot of knowledge about who you're about to call before you do.
And I would urge anybody to spend a little bit of time on the phone with a consultant to do a little bit of not necessarily a pre-interview, but just a nice conversation about sharing what's going on with your particular issues or your ongoing issues, and see if this is possibly a good match for you.
Great. Good advice. Good advice. And you would think that it's common sense, but when the computer suddenly doesn't boot up 2 days before the big presentation, you don't always think clearly. You're just desperate for help.
Right. And unfortunately, there's a lot of other choices that they can make, through Google Ads and through the local nerds to go on wheels. People just need to sort of, they're reacting and they're not really thinking about that. And sometimes they call in people who I call flat tire fixers, and not necessarily a solution that might get them on the road, but not ultimately take care of all their issues.
There's a lot of phony tech support out there too. We had a show about this recently where people are stumbling upon these just basically completely phony tech support companies that sometimes call people unsolicited, get somebody on the phone and then try and tell them they have viruses and things and get a credit card number. But a lot of these turn up when people are searching for things like, help with my Epson printer, like just random sort of generic Google phrases like that. And they're reaching not Epson's tech support, not Apple, but some other third-party company where the quality is really low, and who knows what they've installed on the computer by the time they get into it. So it can be really dangerous. But if you go with the Apple Consultants Network, like Jerry and Sam said, look at the reviews, look at the history of how long somebody's been in business, and you can really learn a lot from a phone conversation as well. So yeah, definitely go with somebody Apple certified for sure.
That's a great point. And I want to go back and ask Jerry again, the website, because that way you can go to the Apple site, you're going to the Apple site, and therefore you're being referred to an Apple Consultant Network certified person that at least has a relationship with Apple. And the website, Jerry, is?
That's right. So that's consultants.apple.com.
Great.
So it's part of the Apple point of presence online. So
Command Control Power, what is its presence online? Do you have a website, or is it strictly a podcast through the iTunes store?
Yeah, commandcontrolpower.com. A couple variations of that, but any way you can think to spell it should work if I've done my job. We're all fairly active on Twitter using that account. Mostly Jerry and myself. Sam, you got to get on that. But you can follow us at CMD.
That's cold.
CMD, CTRL, PWR on Twitter. And certainly subscribe to us through the iTunes store. Is probably the best way or iTunes, I should say, podcast directory. It's the best way to subscribe to us, and you'll find that link on commandcontrolpower.com as well.
Great. Now, I know we talked a little bit before the show about this, and I'm not sure you all were completely comfortable, but if you want to, I'd love to have you give your specific company URLs as well, each one of you, so that if people feel like that are in the Connecticut area and they need some help and they've seen you three or any one of you three and feel like there's a resonance there, or they're just desperate, they can call you. At least they've seen you now. So again, going across the screen, Jerry?
Sure. So we are active on Twitter as well. So if you could follow MacWorks, that's the name of my company, on Twitter. So it's MacWorks LLC. That's the Twitter handle. And you can find us online at macworksllc.com.
Great. Sam?
You can find us at hcsonline.com. We also have an Apple Authorized Training Center. That's instructusllc.com. And I'm incredibly active on Twitter at uid501.com. .com. UID501.
Incredibly.
Now you can incredibly active, as you can tell.
Yes. That's why you got to get on the other part. Joe, how about you?
So Sam has a great Twitter handle, whereas mine is not very active, as Jerry often shames me. I have the egg still, I believe. I think that's the default icon.
Nice.
But you can, yeah, I like it so much, I just decided to keep it. But you can find me at psimac.com, psimac.com. Very proud of that 6-letter domain, which was still available when I started my company. And I should add, as probably speak for all three of us, we all do some remote support. I do a lot of remote support, so it's not really necessarily just limited to Connecticut. We have clients all over the place. When they travel, they still are our clients. So it probably goes for a lot of ACNs as well. So call your local person, or certainly give one of us a call.
But just go with me there for a second. So sure. I'm in Pennsylvania. So if I called you and said, hey, I need some help, you're able to, we work out something where you can get into my machine or help me out. Is that correct?
Yeah. So for existing clients, we oftentimes will set them up with our preferred remote support software, where they can choose whether we're able to get in sort of for unattended access or just on demand. For new clients, we would just direct you to a link where you will download the software, click a button to initiate the connection, where we can then see your screen and basically operate on the keyboard and mouse as if we were there. So you'll see your mouse moving around, you'll see us typing as needed, and we'll be on the phone with you, so we can kind of maintain that rapport and sort of walk you through what we're doing and hear your feedback as we go. But it's a really effective way to give services, especially for obviously clients that are either traveling or even for shorter issues or things we can just deal with very quickly without having to spend the time in the car driving there and back and charging a minimum and things like that.
So folks, if you decide to take that option, be very careful who you give that kind of access to. These guys are okay. Some of the ones we were talking about before, probably not. Make sure it's somebody credible that you know or have been referred to by someone that you trust. Because boy, in a very short period of time, they can do a lot of damage very quickly. I hate to end on a scary note, but that does scare me a little bit. Not the fact that you could do it or would do it, but the uneducated people out there who might go to some fly-by-night operation and end up with a whole lot more problems than they started with.
Yeah, I just helped somebody through that recently, actually about a week ago, and we have it in one of our recent shows. That actually the one I referred to earlier, phony tech support, where we detailed the issue that she faced, how they got in, and what they were able to do before she called us, her actual tech support.
I think a nice way to end up, Chuck, here, and before we hand it over to you, is hand it over to Sam. If anybody's watching this show and is really excited about maybe finding this to be an Apple consultant as a possible career path for you, there are very, very clear pathways that you can follow to become an Apple consultant. And maybe Sam could speak to that a little bit, since he runs a company that also is as an Apple trainer.
Well, certainly the certifications are a big plus, and that's a requirement these days to be a part of the consultancy. So you can go to a local Apple authorized training center and take the appropriate courses to be either desktop certified, the Support Essentials 101 class, or server certified with Server Essentials 201. And either of those will get you, along with the appropriate exam, will get you the proper certification to then gain entryway into the Apple Consultants Network.
Sounds simple enough to get started.
If you have the right trainer.
Little extra plug there. Guys, thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I hope it's given people at least an idea of where they can go to get some help and some ideas about what's going on behind the curtain when they're asking for that help. And that curtain better be the Apple Consultants Network to be safe.
That's right.
Jerry, Sam, Joe, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck. It was great.
Command Control Power, folks, go. Take a listen. It sounds like there's some great stories, even if the tech stuff may get a little heavy. Some fun stories. I think I'm going to go and listen to the phony tech support one. We'll see you again soon, guys. I hope we'll do it again.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Folks, Mac Voices is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Please check our show notes. I'll have links to Command Control Power. Yes, I said that right. Command Control Power, along with links to all these gentlemen and their bios and where you can find them on the web. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.